you deny the darkness in your soul. Veigar, the tiny master of evil. For most of the peoples of Runeterra, Yordles are not typically something to be feared. Their fabled home of Bandle City is said to be a mysterious, spiritual place, filled with odd trinkets and keepsakes gathered from across the material realm. While these curious creatures often leave to dwell among mortal races for a time, they generally return with fresh tales and new experiences to recount. Yet sadly, there are also those Yordles who lose their way. Among them is the sorcerer Veigar. After the Great Darken War left the world in ruin many centuries ago, the only light that seemed to shine on Valoran came from the skies above. Scattered survivors looked to the heavens, and their renewed study of ancient celestial magic piqued Veigar's interest. Imagining himself already a master of these mystical arts, the Yordle joined an order of mages in the Noxii territories, hoping to learn more of their craft. They did not think to question this eager newcomer, and he taught them to draw hope from the patterns created by the movements of the stars. But while many toiled to rebuild the world, others sought to conquer it. The brutal warlord Mordekaiser and his armies swept across the lands, crushing and enslaving any who would oppose his rule, and the mages of the Order, unskilled in war, were of little value to this tyrant. Looming over them in his accursed battle plate, his keen eye fell upon Veigar, and Mordekaiser recognized the Yordle for what he truly was. He snatched him up in one iron gauntlet and dragged his prize away as the other mages were put to the sword. Imprisoned in the heart of the warlord's new, monolithic fortress, Veigar was forced to turn his magic to darker purposes. Knowing that Yordles were craftier than any of the mortal races, Mordekaiser bound Veigar to the physical plane, preventing him even from escaping to Bandle City. He was not the only captive in that hellish place, but such isolation was the worst and most cruel form of torture for a Yordle. Veigar performed grisly enchantments against his will, some strengthening his master's dominion, others simply evoking terror for terror's sake. Indeed, terror was what seemed to fuel this dreadful empire. Miserable beyond imagining, Veigar became a reluctant witness as Mordekaiser's vile deeds empowered him to near immortality. Whether it was over the course of decades or centuries, Veigar never knew. But eventually the Yordle's magic and appearance started to twist in response. Memories of his past faded. Why had he come to Valoran? Where had he come from? Had he known any other life before this? Questions such as these weighed on his fragile mind like the last flickers of light before an eclipse. When the Revenant Warlord's own followers conspired against him, the nightmare of his reign was ended. But by this point, Veigar was nigh unrecognizable. His eyes blazed. Even his voice had become a sneer of malice. Fleeing from his ensorcelled cage, the wretched creature had no interest in the wars of succession that inevitably followed. Deep down, he most likely yearned to regain the sense of safety and freedom that all living things crave. And yet he chose not to turn away from evil, but to embrace it. Clad in armor befitting a sinister warlock, he vowed to seize respect in the only way he could remember, through ruthless villainy inspiring fear in all who encountered him. He would call down the fury of the stars themselves upon his foes and trap them in the timeless infinities between moments. And yet, Veigar could not quite find the same success as his former captor. Certainly, the good people of Valoran did learn to fear him, to some extent. More often than not, they would find their pastures scorched, or the local baron's mansion razed to its foundations. Sometimes, though, inexplicably, bands of brigands would be driven from their woodland hideouts, or the remains of feral merc wolves found scattered through the town square, and it was difficult to tell whether these acts were malicious or actually reasonably helpful. For all his aspirations of evil-doing, it seemed Veigar would always come up a tiny bit short. Still, the nefarious Yordle has not abandoned his quest to become the world's most wicked villain. With his diabolic staff in hand, he seeks nothing less than to bring all before him to their knees, and revels in the timely demise of those who dare to underestimate him. The true and ghastly tale of the Beast of Boliham Tower, by Amanda. Geoffrey Thunderclouds rolled off the Argent Mountains, promising pyrotechnics, but delivering none. From the tower, the advancing mob looked like a child's mismatched toys, all toothpick spears and tiny torches. The figure at the head of the group was tall, with a splash of gray hair and a blade belted to her homespun tunic. Veigar watched as the group started battering the outer gates, incensed by his villainous ways, demanding justice for the terrible acts he had wrought. Finally, he hurried down the stairs to the inner door. There was a mighty crack as the gates gave way, and villagers tumbled into the courtyard. The leader drew her sword and advanced, picking her way between ungainly limbs, waiting for the rest of the group to find their feet and hold the right end of their spears. Squinting through the gap in the door, Veigar giggled with anticipation. The woman's gaze snapped up. Veigar clapped a gauntlet over his mouth, but the jig was up. The farmers tripped over themselves to cower behind their leader's skirts. It was perfect. He stepped back and, barely holding his staff steady with all his booming laughter, blasted open the door with an explosive ball of purple energy. He strode out to the top of the stone steps as the dust settled. He knew how imposing a figure he must strike, his hat barely clearing the enormous door frame, his iron boots sending up sparks and thunder with each giant step, his gauntlet big enough to crush any fool who might challenge him. Unfortunately, the cowering villagers hadn't looked up yet, and holding an intimidating pose this long was starting to feel forced. He let go of the breath he'd been holding and deflated a little. "The villain!" shouted the leader, eventually brandishing her blade in his direction. In the shadow beneath his hat, Veigar grinned. He drew himself up as intimidatingly as possible as the villagers beheld him. Then the shouting and wailing began. Delightfully, someone at the back even fainted. He gathered his sinister magic, gaining an inky nimbus and causing violet sparks to leap off spear tips and belt buckles. The leader stumbled back as a serpentine gash of deepest midnight encircled the villagers and exploded upwards into an ensnaring cage of sorcery. "Silence!" Veigar commanded them. He relished every long stride down the steps toward the trapped mob. Around them, humming walls of violet light stretched between claw-like pillars, forming an eldritch henge. He stopped barely a sword's length from the leader, glaring at his prisoners through his arcane barrier. "I can see the fear in your hearts," he began with a derisive, humorless snort. "You dare march here to challenge my dread rule. I, Veigar, who has yoked the magic of the universe to my will. Veigar, great master of evil, who has defeated countless arcane foes in my quest for ever greater. Cursed my fields with rat weevils for 2 seasons. You have." An especially cloddish-looking farmer cried out, crimson-faced with fury. Veigar blinked, trying to process this interruption. "Cursed you with what?" "And ye turned dolly lame the week afore harvest," claimed an outraged tiller, wagging her finger at the increasingly befuddled great master of evil. With that, the banks broke and the villagers began to make all of their grievances heard. Veigar could only catch snippets of the loudest accusations, the majority featuring soured milk and undersized beets. As he shrunk away from the verbal onslaught, the purple barrier flickered and collapsed. But the villagers didn't even notice. They shuffled forward, yelling in his face. He felt the stone banister of the stairs at his back. He was surrounded. He tried feebly to respond, his voice losing depth with every word. "But I am..." They crowded closer, glaring, now eye to eye with him rather than looking up. Suddenly, a commanding older voice rose over the din. "Stand down, everyone." "But Margot," someone began, before the leader's glare withered their objection. The mob retreated, and Veigar found himself alone with her. She seemed more than twice his height by this point, and radiated confidence. He hated her. "All right, villain," she spat. "You've heard our accusations. Do you plead innocence?" Veigar felt like he had been slapped. He puffed out his chest, feeling a foot taller. "Innocence? Innocence?" He turned and began climbing the steps, gaining height on the crowd. "You have the audacity to bring your superstitious bellyachings to my door, and then insult me by asking if I deny them." He glared over his shoulder in their direction. "I do. I deny every one of them. But do not dare presume that I claim innocence. You accuse me of evil-doing, and I am evil. Since I took this arcane tower from its puny owner, I have burned your fields. I have terrorized your warlords, defeating them so thoroughly that they swore never to return." He took the last 2 stairs in one great stride. "And I have begun my campaign of terror upon neighboring villainous sorcerers, for none will be permitted to obstruct my path to ultimate magical power." At this, the sky crackled, and magical bolts hurtled from the clouds, exploding around the courtyard. Veigar threw his head back and laughed, reveling in the sheer glory of his own evil. These puny mortals would beg forgiveness in the face of his terrible magnificence. When he stopped for breath, the villagers were conferring in a huddle, casting appraising glances in his direction. One of them popped her head up. "Did you defeat Vixis the Cruel, the warlord?" "Of course I did." She failed to exhibit proper deference, and I... His words trailed off as the group returned to their earnest whispers. Veigar shifted uncomfortably, straining to hear what they were saying. One by one, the mob nodded to each other and turned to face him. They found him coolly admiring the polished gleam of his gauntlet. The leader, Margot, strode to the bottom of the steps, awkwardly half bowing, and addressed him. "Oh, great and mighty, sorcerer?" "Wizard," Veigar corrected her. "Mighty wizard? We, the residents of the barely worth bothering with village of Bolehem." "That's our village," someone helpfully interjected. Margot sighed. "Yes, our village. Well, you see, we've come to our senses and do humbly beg the mighty wizard Greyjar." "It's Veigar! Veigar! Sorry, Veigar. We humbly beg that you spare us and just, keep doing what you're doing." Veigar narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Well, we'll just go home, and you keep doing your reign of terror thingy. Live and let terrorize, that's what I say." This had to be some kind of trick, and yet she went on. "Of course we'd exhibit the proper, deference. Curse your name in your absence. Spread tales of your vile rampage. Frank says his cousin down in Glorft heard a rumor of an evil sorcerer, if you'd be interested in, destroying them and taking their dread sorceries for my own." Veigar clenched his gauntleted hand, imagining the sweet triumph of crushing an arcane peer in a wizard battle. Margot was watching him carefully. Hopefully, Veigar realized. Finally, after a long pause, he rolled his eyes and flourished his staff. "You fools! You thought you could trick me, Veigar, master of evil? Perhaps you hoped I would grant you the mercy of a swift and painless end. Well, I regret to inform you that your lives are simply not worth my time." He laughed, a big, booming laugh, to match his renewed stature. "Take yourselves from my sight, insignificant peasants. Return to Bolem and pray I do not find you worthy of my attention ever again." The villagers managed a few half-hearted bows or curtsies before shuffling back toward the damaged archway. Margot chanced a quick wink at him, then turned to leave. "Wait!" he thundered. Her hand snapped to the pommel of her sword. With as much indifference as he could muster, Veigar edged his way down the steps once more. "When do you think I could talk to Frank's cousin about that other sorcerer?" Long ago, before the universe learned to fear his name. Veigar was small even by Yordle standards, quiet, brilliant, and endlessly curious. He lived among the hidden enclaves of Bandle City, where magic drifted through the air like pollen, and knowledge was shared freely. Veigar adored the stars. He believed that if one could understand the heavens, then nothing in the world would ever feel chaotic or cruel again. That belief did not survive the mortal world. During a rare crossing beyond Bandle's protections, Veigar was captured by Mordekaiser, the Iron Revenant, whose hunger for arcane power was as endless as death itself. The Yordle's sighs amused the tyrant at first. His screams did not. Mordekaiser bound Veigar in chains, etched with runes of domination, and sealed him in a tower of iron and shadow. There the Lich forced knowledge into him, ancient, forbidden sorcery that bent reality and crushed sanity. Veigar was made to watch stars collapse, worlds burn, and hope decay into nothingness. Time lost meaning. Pain became instruction. Fear became discipline. Yet Veigar survived. Something within him hardened, crystallized by suffering. He learned the spells not to obey, but to endure. And one day, when Mordekaiser's attention turned elsewhere, Veigar turned that knowledge inward and shattered his prison in a storm of cosmic fury. The tower collapsed, the chains vaporized, and the Yordle vanished into the night sky like a falling star. But he did not return to Bandle City. Veigar believed, no, knew, that the world was cruel beyond repair. Kindness was weakness. Order was a lie told by those strong enough to enforce it. If the universe demanded monsters, then he would become the greatest one of all. He crowned himself the tiny master of evil, not in jest, but in defiance. Evil, he reasoned, was the only force that could never be betrayed. So Veigar traveled Runeterra, gathering power from the darkest corners of magic. He bent starlight into weapons, crushed armies beneath singularities, and reduced fortresses to glittering dust. He laughed as he did it, high-pitched, manic, triumphant, because laughter was louder than the memories screaming in his mind. And yet, something went wrong. The tyrants he destroyed had ruled through terror. The monsters he obliterated had preyed on the helpless. The villages he conquered rebuilt themselves stronger than before. Wherever Veigar went, people whispered his name not with fear, but with gratitude. They called him a protector, a savior, a hero. Veigar hated that word. Each time he heard it, his grip on his staff tightened. Each cheer felt like mockery. Didn't they understand? He was evil incarnate. He had suffered, endured, and embraced darkness beyond their comprehension. He did not want their praise. He wanted their terror. Still the stars obeyed him. The cosmos bent. His power grew. Now Veigar stands beneath the infinite sky, gazing upward at the same stars he once loved. They no longer bring him comfort, only challenge. Somewhere among them lies the ultimate spell, the final proof of his supremacy, the moment when the universe itself will tremble and finally acknowledge him as the greatest villain Runeterra has ever known. Until that day comes, Veigar plots. He schemes. He shouts grand declarations at an uncaring world. And when evil rises to threaten the innocent, he will be there, by coincidence alone, to annihilate it. Because nothing would be more cruel than becoming a hero by accident. The universe, unfortunately, refused to cooperate. In the weeks that followed, Veigar's name spread farther than ever before. Caravans altered their routes at the mere rumor of his presence, not to flee, but to seek him out. Desperate kings prayed for his arrival. Mages whispered that wherever the tiny master of evil walked, impossible threats simply ceased to exist. Veigar paced atop a fractured spire, the remains of some ancient evil cult smoldering below him. Their dark god had screamed as it was consumed by a collapsing star Veigar had conjured with exquisite cruelty. The display had been flawless, terrifying, absolute. And yet, as the dust settled, survivors emerged, not screaming but kneeling. "Stop that!" Veigar shrieked, stomping his foot. "This was an evil obliteration. You were meant to despair, to wail, to run away dramatically." They only bowed deeper. Veigar vanished in a burst of violet light, reappearing leagues away, his mind buzzing with rage and doubt. Had Mordekaiser broken him more deeply than he realized? Was this some cosmic joke, written into the stars themselves? He hurled bolts of dark matter into the sky, daring the heavens to answer him. The stars remained silent. At night, when no one watched, memories crept back in, chains clinking, iron laughter, the cold certainty that he had once been small and powerless. Veigar snarled at the weakness, burying it beneath layers of arrogance and fury. Evil did not feel fear. Evil did not hesitate. And yet, evil remembered. So Veigar planned something grander, louder, impossible to misunderstand. A catastrophe so vast that no one could call it heroic. He began gathering power unlike any before, drawing from black holes between realities, from dying stars and forgotten spells etched into the fabric of time. The air around him warped, space bent. Even the cosmos seemed uneasy. This why he promised himself would be the moment everything changed. When the spell was complete, the sky split open, but instead of annihilation, the magic lashed outward, severing a world-threatening rift that had been silently growing for centuries. A calamity that would have devoured nations simply vanished. Runeterra was saved. Again. Veigar stood frozen, staring at the calm sky where devastation should have been. Slowly, a scream built in his chest, part rage, part despair, part something dangerously close to heartbreak. "No," he whispered. Then louder, "No."